Hi everybody, I'm at RC Charlotte in the hotel room filming in the bathroom because it has the best lighting. And over the course of the past few weeks, we've talked a lot about Boros Convoke. We've done a deck tech, we've done a sideboard guide against the top 10 most popular decks, we've done flex slots and different builds of the deck, and we've done some tips and tricks with the Boros Convoke deck. So I wanted to combine them all into one big video, one big deep dive. Enjoy.
This is the new Boros Convoke deck. Now, what this deck overall is attempting to do is put a bunch of permanents onto the battlefield, whether they be something that makes another permanent like a Novice Inspector, makes two things like Resolute Reinforcements, etc., and then capitalize on having all of those permanents on the battlefield by pumping up Warden of the Inner Sky an insane amount, being able to tap them to convoke Knight Errant of Eos, being a large body in and of itself, while grabbing more things to flood the field with, and Imidane's Recruiter, which pumps up all of your creatures and gives everything haste, and you can jam for a lot of damage that your opponent often didn't see coming. Now, what's the reason we're playing Boros now instead of Jeskai? And the big thing is the addition of this Aether Drift card, Nesting Bot. Now, it's a 1/1 for 1 that when it dies, create a 1/1 colorless artifact creature token, and it has max speed. This creature gets +1/+0. So what? This is the decent aristocrat card, but what are we going to do with it? Well, you see, it's an artifact in and of itself, and it being an artifact that we can target with Gleeful Demolition, and then not only target it with Gleeful Demolition, but be able to get another creature, so we immediately have 5 creatures on the battlefield, is incredibly powerful. Especially it is white itself, so it can just act like what you need to convoke Knight Errant of Eos. So this is the biggest reason. We're replacing a Spyglass Siren, and then it just becomes about being really consistent rather than having to play all these different colors so that we have enough targets for Gleeful Demolition and enough things for Warden of the Inner Sky. So Nesting Bot allows us to do that. Now, Spyglass Siren has definitely some benefits, but this is just so much better because it's consistent, and we're an aggro deck. We really need to be consistent. So there's a couple of different categories that this deck creates. So I'm going to take just a second and show you them. So these are the different categories in the Boros Convoke deck. Now, as 3 major categories, we have kind of combo pieces, I would call it, like ways to flood the board, payoffs from flooding the board, and then this is removal. So let's talk about the removal first, and then we can talk about the meat and potatoes of the deck. Case the Gateway Express. Actually, I might even put this in the payoffs section. Yeah, so we're gonna keep that in payoff section, actually. So as far as the early layers of the deck, we have Nesting Bot, which I've already talked about. Novice Inspector, which is a creature of itself, but also creates a clue, which is an artifact that can be targeted with Gleeful Demolition. Clockwork Percussionist, which is a 1-mana artifact creature with haste. When it dies, exile the top card of your library. You may play it until the end of your next turn. It's a 1/1. So we love that this is an artifact creature, so we can play it, be able to apply a little bit of pressure with it. And then when it either gets blocked or we Gleeful Demolition it, we effectively get to see and play the next card in our deck, which is amazing. And we have 4 Resolute Reinforcements. It's a 1/1 with Flash. When this creature enters, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Even better in the blue version of the deck because we can show Counterspell or that. But really, we're just playing this as a 2 creature for 1 card situation. Gleeful Demolition is a 1 red sorcery. Destroy target artifact. If you control that artifact, create 3 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. So what's cool about Gleeful Demolition is not only does it allow us to have main deck artifact tape, but we can target Nesting Bot, Novices, the artifact created by Novice Inspector, Clockwork Percussionist, or, and we're going to talk about this in just a second, the creature from Mirex, to create 3 more creatures, and in the case of Nesting Bot, 4 more creatures. So let's talk about Mirex, which probably should go in this category as well, because it's not a red or white land, except for the first turn it's played. Really, we're playing it, right? Tap it, and 3 mana to create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and the creature can't block. It's just another creature. Sometimes they answer our initial aggro and we need it to go long. Sometimes we need it as an artifact. It's just all around like a solid land to be playing in this deck. And then these are payoffs. And so the first payoff, Case the Gateway Express. So this is a 2-mana case. When it enters 2 target creature you don't control, each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature. So if we have a bunch of creatures on the board, we can get almost anything out of the way. And then you solve it if you've attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn. We flood the board, so we attack with 3 or more creatures quite often. And when it's solved, creatures you control get +1/+0. So it's a removal, and also it's an anthem that is very easy to turn on. We're playing Warden of the Inner Sky, which is nice because it's a 1-mana creature. It's a 1/2, which is solid. And we can tap 3 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control to put a +1/+1 counter on Warden of the Inner Sky. Scry 1, activate only as a sorcery. So we can flood the board, put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on it. And then what's cool is if it has 3 or more counters on it, it has flying and vigilance. So it can block big things, attack for a lot, in the air if we just invest some creatures into it. And really we can very often just like play the creatures and tap the summoning sick ones to Warden of the Inner Sky, or just tap these artifacts like the Clue that we don't really care about. We're playing 4 Imidane's Recruiter. It's a 3-mana 2/2. When Imidane's Recruiter enters, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain haste until end of turn. So what's great about that is we get to flood the board, flood the board, flood the board. If we have some extra mana, some new creatures, because they'll get haste, Imidane's Recruiter, everything gets bigger, jam, and deal an insane amount of damage that your opponent doesn't expect. The adventure side of Imidane's Recruiter, just even though we'd play it anyway with that ability, is create 2 2/2 White Knight creature tokens with vigilance. If we're casting that side, something's probably gone a little wrong. But it's nice because even though it's very mana intensive, it goes along with our initial game plan, and it's a way to like catch back up, especially since we can follow it up with Imidane's Recruiter. We're playing some Sanguine Evangelist. This could also be in the combo piece pile, but the reason I put it in the payoff category is because it has Battle Cry. So it's a 3-mana 2/1 that gets a 1/1 flying back creature token onto the battlefield when it enters or dies, which is kind of cool because it can survive some board wipes. It's a payoff because it has Battle Cry. If you attack with it, so not the same turn it comes out, so it's not as good as Imidane's Recruiter, it pumps your whole team +1/+0, which allows us to get a payoff for going super, super wide. We're playing War Leader's Call. It is a 3-mana enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1, so we already see why this is a payoff. And whenever a creature you control enters, War Leader's Call deals 1 damage to each opponent. So we're able to play it, pump up our team, attack for a whole bunch, likely more than their opponent was expecting, but then future creatures that we play can get that little extra reach, especially after a board wipe. And then the biggest payoff, in my opinion, is Knight Errant of Eos. It is a 5-mana 4/4. However, it has Convoke, which means you can tap creatures alongside lands to pay for this card, and every creature you tap counts as 1 mana of that creature's color. So we can play this as early as turn 2 by going turn 1 Artifact Thing, turn 2 Gleeful Demolition, Knight Errant of Eos. Or maybe even another 1-drop, and we can just tap creatures, which is an amazing start. So it's a big creature of itself. However, when Knight Errant of Eos enters, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X or less from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoke Knight Errant of Eos. Put the revealed cards into your hand, then shuffle. So this card is essential to this deck because we get to have a nut hand, fill our hand with other things after we already apply a threat, which is really important. And it can grab nearly everything in our deck, even more Knight Errant of Eos if you used only Convoke creatures. So it's a giant payoff. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to fill the board. We're trying to play one of these payoffs or multiple of these payoffs after we fill the board and defeat our opponents with a very difficult to answer and weird aggro. As far as sideboard goes, Get Lost is great. Removal for big creatures so that we can attack out. Also deals with planeswalkers really well and enchantments like out of the domain deck. And we can use it on our own thing to create map tokens if we really need a target for Gleeful Demolition or Warden of the Inner Sky or whatever. We're playing 3 Invasion of Gobakhan because board wipes are really rough for this deck. Really, we're playing it for both sides, which is one of the only decks that actually likes both sides very much. When Invasion of Gobakhan enters, look at the target opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land card from it. For as long as the card remains exiled, this owner may play it. A spell costs 2 more this way. So we're able to delay the board wipe with this card. And the best part is the Light Shield Array, where at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that attacked this turn. So if we're able to defeat this siege, which only starts with 3 defense, it flips into this Light Shield Array that will reward us for having a lot of creatures by pumping up our creatures every single turn if we attacked. And we can sacrifice it to have creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible till end of turn, which allows us to effectively counter some board wipes or counter magic the turn before we kill our opponents. We're playing Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. 3 Sheltered by Ghosts. It's a 2-mana enchantment. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 on its lifelink and ward, and when it enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. We're mostly playing this for the aggressive decks to get something out of the way, and we're able to gain a lot of life, especially if we put it on something like a Knight Errant of Eos. We're playing one split up for aggressive decks, as it can be very easily be a one-sided board wipe in against decks that are trying to race each other. Playing 2 Torch the Tower again for these aggressive decks. It gets things out of the way. It kills blockers, and then it exiles the thing. So we're able to have an answer to Heartfire Hero where we don't get dealt damage, which is really nice. And then we're playing 2 Urbrass Forge for these decks that go really, really long, but not the authority of the console decks, because Urbrass Forge just reads your opponent gains a life every turn if your opponent has authority of the console. Decks that are looking to answer us rather than race us, Urbrass Forge can kind of really push it over the top. So this is Boros Convoke. As far as the sideboard goes, Get Lost, great enchantment hate, and really good against creatures that kind of have big butts and we're having a hard time attacking through. Invasion of Gobakhan is mostly for board wipes and I guess combo decks. Rest in Peace, great graveyard hate. Shelter by Ghosts, mostly for aggro decks. Split Up, again, mostly for aggro decks, but really just like heavy creature-based decks. Torch a Tower for aggro decks, but also decent against the enduring cards. And Urbrass Forge for decks that go really, really long. That being said, the most popular deck in Standard is Gruul Aggro, and we're actually going to be sideboarding the same against Gruul Prowess and Mono Red Prowess as well. We will be siding in the Get Lost, the Sheltered by Ghosts, the Split Up, and the Torch the Towers. And we're going to be sideboarding out, first and foremost, these cards that don't really do anything when they enter, or are just like a little expensive. I'm going to shave on Clockwork Percussionist. That's actually going to happen a lot. It's kind of like the flex slot in the deck. And then a split between Immodane's Recruiter and Resolute Reinforcements. Resolute Reinforcements has a really hard time blocking properly, and Immodane's Recruiter, we're going to be blocking enough that it's kind of hard to make Immodane's Recruiter relevant. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against the red base aggro decks. The second most popular deck in Standard is Esper Self Bounce. We're actually going to sideboard the same against Esper Self Bounce and Dimir Self Bounce. Against this deck, I like Torch the Tower and Get Lost. Just has this creature removal. It's really all I want, though. You're siding out of these Clockwork Percussionists and some more Legis Call. Other than that, I want to stick to the primary game plan just with additional removal. So I sideboard against the bounce decks. I already talked about the third most popular deck, which is Dimir Self Bounce. So the fourth most popular deck is Golgari Midrange. Against Golgari, Get Lost is excellent. I'm actually a fan of Invasion of Gobakhan because of Gix's command. And we're going to be siding out of Resolute Reinforcements. Doesn't really do much. And shaving a Clockwork Percussionist. So I'm going to sideboard against Golgari Midrange. The fifth most popular deck is Domain. Obviously, Get Lost is excellent because of all the enchantments and the big butted creatures. Invasion of Gobakhan is important so you don't get Zernutted and to slow down the Sunfalls. Also, I've stopped siding in Urbrass Forge just because of authority of the consoles. It's mostly for like other slower decks, like non-white slower decks. That being said, we're going to take out Case just because it's kind of hard for us to have enough creatures to actually kill something with Case. And we're also going to side out a single Sanguine Evangelist just because it's a little slow and we have to be able to fight through board wipes. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against Domain. The sixth most popular deck is the Dimir Midrange deck. Against this deck, I'm in love with Torch the Tower. Get Lost is excellent. And we're just going to be siding out of these Resolute Reinforcements. That's how I sideboard against Dimir Midrange. We already talked about the seventh and eighth most popular decks, which is Gruul Prowess and Mono Red Prowess. So the ninth most popular deck is Jeskai Convoke, the counterpart to this deck. And we're going to be bringing in the Torch the Towers. We're going to be bringing in the Split Up. I don't think I'm a big fan of Shelter by Ghosts. And I don't think we can afford to bring in Get Lost as well. It's mostly just going to be who's the faster deck. We're going to bring out the Sanguine Evangelist and then a single Resolute Reinforcements. I actually really like War Leader's Call because it makes our creatures just bigger and it makes it easier to block and attack. But this is on my sideboard against Jeskai Convoke. The 10th most popular deck is Azorius Tempo, the Hottie Jin, Aberranoculus, that stuff. Get Lost is pretty good. Split Up is pretty good. Rest in Peace is pretty good. And our plan is just to go as underneath them as possible. War Leader's Call, we're sideboard out of these 3-mana things that don't deal a ton of damage. So I'm going to sideboard against the Azorius Tempo deck. So we're starting with the non-flex slots. If you play Boros Convoke in Standard, you are pretty much bought in to playing these cards. These 51 cards in the main deck and the single card in the sideboard. As you can see, this is a newer archetype that is not totally figured out yet. So if you'd like to look at the cards you pretty much have to play, please pause the video and check it out. This video is about the flex slots, so let's talk about those. So you're going to be selecting 9 of these 17 cards to play in the main deck and 14 of these 30 cards to play in the sideboard. Let's talk about these cards and why you would play them. Yodian Frontliner is a 1-mana 1/1. Whenever Yodian Frontliner attacks another target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and you can unearth for 1 white, which basically just means bring it back to the battlefield, but then it gets exiled, and it like has haste and whatnot. The reason this card is decent is because it's a good target for Gleeful Demolition. And being an artifact, it's a creature you can attack with and actually attack. It's kind of a 2-power creature because it can pump something else up. And even after you Gleeful Demolition or it's blocked or whatever, you can bring it back to either Gleeful Demolition again or like attack for even more. You could play up to 2 Clockwork Percussionist, which is a 1-mana 1/1 with haste. When Clockwork Percussionist dies, exile the top card of your library. You may play it till the end of your next turn. So Clockwork Percussionist is also an artifact creature with haste, so it can attack immediately. It can be targeted with Gleeful Demolition, which we love, and then it digs us even deeper, which can be pretty important in a deck that has a lot of redundant cards, and you need to draw kind of both sides of your deck, the enablers and the payoffs. You can play the 4th Case of the Great Way Express, which is an enchantment case. When it enters, choose 1 target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature, which you should always be able to kill your opponent's creatures with this. We are going super, super wide. If you can't with Case, then something has already gone horribly wrong. And to solve it is we've attacked with 3 or more creatures, which is very easy to do with this deck. And then essentially anthems, right? Creatures you control get +1/+0, which is excellent as we go super, super wide. Well, if we play this, we're playing it as a removal spell. The pump is mostly just gravy. You can play Resolute Reinforcements 3 and 4. It is a 2-mana 1/1 with flash. When it enters, you get another 1/1. This is 2 permanents with 1 card. That's the primary reason we're playing this. Another kind of interesting part with this is that it's instant speed, so we can make them fear other stuff. But it's a little less powerful in the Boros deck where we can't like leave up Protect the Negotiators or whatever. But it's a pretty powerful card if we're feeling like we need some more enablers. You can play 2 Sheltered by Ghosts. It's an enchantment aura. And when it enters, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has lifelink and ward 2. Sheltered by Ghosts, essentially, the primary reason I'll be playing this would be against the aggressive red decks. That's where Sheltered by Ghosts shines, and if you think you're going to be playing against them a lot, then playing some Sheltered by Ghosts in the main deck is probably powerful. You can play up to 2 Arabella. It is an artifact creature, legendary though. When it attacks, deals X damage to each opponent, and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. And it's a 1/3. So it can be targeted with Gleeful Demolition, which we love. And it kind of rewards you for going really, really wide, because most of our creatures are power 2 or less. And so this is really good against decks that you think you're going to be racing against. Though 2 mana for just a 1/3 is kind of tough. You can play up to 3 Sanguine Evangelists. It is a 3-mana 2/1 with Battle Cry, which means when it attacks, all other creatures that are also attacking get +1/+0. And when it enters or dies, create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. So it's 2 bodies in 1 card. If they answer this, which they kind of have to because Battle Cry is super nasty in this deck, then you get another bat that has evasion, allows you to go wide, and it's kind of like a payoff in and of itself. So it's a really good like bridge card between not quite being an enabler, not quite being a payoff, but being like a slightly less powerful combination of both. You can play up to 2 War Leader's Call. It's a 3-mana enchantment. It is an anthem. Creatures you control get +1/+1. And whenever a creature you control enters, War Leader's Call deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is really good for a lot of surprise damage. Just being able to play it, everything get bigger, jam. So it's certainly a payoff, but it's a pretty horrible top deck, you know, in the deep late game if they're already answering your stuff. It doesn't really help you enable or even help the other payoffs. But it's pretty decent, especially if you're like putting a lot of creatures in the battlefield after you're playing War Leader's Call, but then the game's going super long, so it's kind of tough. Or you can play Painter's Studio Deface Gallery. This is an enchantment room. The first room is when you 3 mana, when you unlock this door, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them till the end of your next turn, and the other one is whenever you attacking creatures you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. So it's effectively a 2 mana anthem. Game +1/+0, so it rewards you for going super wide. And then if the game goes longer, we can dig for 3 mana. So you're going to be selecting 9 of these 17 cards to add to your main deck. Well, let's talk about what we're going to be adding to our sideboard. We're going to be selecting 14 of these 30 cards. You can play up to 2 Requisition Raid, which is 1 white mana with Spree for an additional generic mana, destroy target artifact, for another additional generic mana, destroy target enchantment, and for another additional generic mana, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. So it's great artifact and enchantment hate you can side in, and then with the extra gravy to be able to just like pump all your homies up if you don't have an artifact or enchantment to destroy, or if you'd want to just spend an extra mana on it. Destroy Evil is a 2 mana instant, destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater, or destroy target enchantment. Great enchantment hate, great against decks that have big bluts that are looking to block. You can play up to 4 Invasion of Gobakon. It's a 2-mana siege. When it enters, look at target opponent's hand. You may cast a non-land card from it for as long as that card remains exiled. Its owner may play it. A spell cast this way costs 2 more to cast, and then it flips because it's an invasion. It starts at 3. If you're able to defeat the siege, it flips into enchantment at the beginning of your end step. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that attack this turn, and then we can sacrifice it to have creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So playing 4 of these is certainly a concession to this deck being really soft to board wipes. It can rebuild, but certainly not past 2 board wipes. And so being able to get that out of their hand is really powerful. But also this deck can capitalize on the opposite side, on the Light Shield Array side, pretty well as well, putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures. A second Rest in Peace is a good option for graveyard hate. So 2-mana enchantment, enters, exile all graveyards, and then it exiles anything that would go to the graveyard. You can play up to 3 Sheltered by Ghosts on the sideboard. We've already talked about Sheltered by Ghosts. It's just very, very strong against the aggressive decks. You can play 1 Kutziel's Flanker. It's a 3-mana 3/1 with flash. When it enters, you choose one. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature that left the battlefield under your control this turn. You gain 2 life and scry 2, or exile target player's graveyard. We almost never are going to use the first ability, but it's fine against aggro. We gain life, scry 2, and then we can block, and we can exile target player's graveyard, so it's fine like graveyard hate and to interrupt. It's one of those like Jack of all trades, master of none cards. It's always fine, but it'll never be as good as any dedicated card to one like strategy. Aven Interrupter is filling a similar slot as Invasion of Gobakon. We can play for Aven Interrupter. It's a 3-mana 2/2 with flash and flying. When it enters, exile target spell, it becomes plotted. Spells your opponent cast from graveyard or from exile cost 2 more to cast. This is mostly for the board wipes. It delays those board wipes, which is very powerful against us. It's also decent against combo as well, or even against things that people are casting from the graveyard. What's kind of cool too is it combos with Invasion of Gobakon, because Invasion of Gobakon puts them in exile, and then they have to cast it from exile, and Aven Interrupter makes it cost even 2 more. We can play 2 Lithamanic Barrage. It's a 1-mana red sorcery. It can't be countered, and deals 1 damage to target creature or planeswalker. It deals 5 damage instead if that is white or blue. There's a lot of white or blue decks. Specifically, I'm thinking about the Esper and Dimir bounce decks. This being very, very powerful against. Torch the Tower. It's a 1-mana instant with Bargain, and deal 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker if the spell is Bargain. Instead, deals 3 damage to target creature and to that permanent, and you scry 1, excuse me. If a permanent dealt damage by Torch Tower would die, exile it instead. Mostly we would be playing this card against the aggressive decks. It can be fine against the bounce decks and whatever, but this is very good against the aggressive decks. It's cheap removal. It removes most of their creatures, and it makes it so Heartfire Hero doesn't deal damage to you when he dies. We can play 2 Urbras Forge. It's a 3-mana artifact. Being a combat in your turn, put an oil counter on Urbras Forge. Then create a X1 red Phyrexian horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on Urbras Forge. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. This is very good against decks that are going really long. I think one big issue with this card, though, and the reason it's slowly falling out of favor rather than just being an auto include, is that most of the decks that are going really long, like Blue White Control or the Domain Zur decks or anything like that, are playing Authority of the Consuls in the sideboard. And if your opponent has an Authority of the Consuls, then Urbras Forge just reads your opponent gains 1 life every turn, which we don't love. You can play up to 2 Chandra Spark Hunter. It's a 4-mana planeswalker. At the beginning of combat in your turn, choose up to 1 target vehicle you control until end of turn it becomes artifact creature and gains haste. That doesn't really matter except for its own abilities. It's +2 as you sacrifice an artifact or discard a card if you do draw a card. We're going to have plenty of spare artifacts, and we're going to have a lot of cards that just don't do anything that we're going to draw, so that's great. It's 0 is create a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1, which we can then man up for free at the beginning of combat because of Chandra Spark Hunter's first ability. And it's also very easy to crew, it being crew 1. We're going to have a million X1s. And it's -7 is you get an emblem whenever an artifact you control enters. This emblem deals 3 damage to any target, which in this deck just means you win the game. So it's very good against decks that are really good at answering our strategy, good against board wipe decks, and allows us to have a little bit more longevity. And you can play up to 2 Lightning Helix. It is a 2-mana instant, deal 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. Mostly for the aggressive decks, gives us that little extra life gain and removal. So you're going to be selecting 14 of these 30 cards, and you're going to be selecting 9 of these 17 cards. And then you have your very own, but stock, version of Boros Convoke in Standard. First off, Gleeful Demolition is a part of our combo, right? Being able to Gleeful Demolition our own artifacts is absolutely great, but remember, you can also use it as artifact hate for our opponents. Now, there aren't a lot of hyper powerful artifacts in Standard at the moment, but it's a very, very relevant mode of the card. Remember, clue tokens don't have tapping as a part of the cost. So we can actually tap our clue token to Warden and then still draw a card off of that clue token if we have enough mana. Can't do that with blood tokens or maps or whatever, but we can with clues. And then lastly, and the last like important thing that you need to know about this deck is that you can tap your creatures without combat, which makes split up really, really powerful. If we're in kind of like a stare down situation where you both have a bunch of creatures and they're all untapped and it's kind of just waiting for our opponent to do their thing, we can tap our creatures with Knight Errant of Eos and Warden and then cast split up and say untapped to have a one-sided board wipe without having to kind of like kill our creatures by attacking into a bunch of creatures that they can like block really well with.
If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.